This is a message to all my supporters of this podcast. I'm introducing a new supporters program. You can contribute a small amount as a one-off payment to show your love for this podcast. Thank you in advance for all your contributions.
News, laws, and regulations are changing by the day. We get it. And at ADP, we're here to help guide you with up-to-the-minute compliance expertise, so you can pay your people accurately and on time, regardless of what each new day may bring. Learn more at adp.com.
This is the Absolute Business Mindset podcast, created and hosted by Mark Hayward. I'm a corporate employee with an entrepreneurial mindset. This podcast will help and support you with new ideas about business. These are my thoughts, ideas, and comments. Today I'm talking to George McGehrin about his career in accountancy and in headhunting and recruitment. Hello, George. How are you?
Mark, it's good to be with you. Thanks for having me on.
It's a pleasure, absolute pleasure. So it's affecting everyone at the moment. We're going to have to talk about the elephant in the room. So how is COVID-19 affecting your business?
Right. So I have two businesses. One's an executive placement search firm, right? So we do retained search. So, sort of like an attorney or solicitor or lawyer. We charge some of our fees up front before we start sort of a deal, and then we get the other half upon completion. We have, in terms of new business, we have zero, right? So I think things are on pause till about July. Yeah. And in terms of searches that we had in, sort of moving along, they've sort of stopped at the 50% mark, 50%, mark. So that's on hold, right? So this is, I would say that most of my clients, and we have clients that sort of range all over the place in terms of industry, geography, and revenue, all over the world. Most of the folks that we're dealing with are on pause, for now until about June, July, and it is what it is to some extent. We've lived through this before, so I feel like one of the lucky ones. The second business we have is an executive branding business, which helps folks with their LinkedIn profiles and their CVs and their biographies. Yeah. And that does extremely well in good economies. It does very well in sort of poor economies, right? So that's going very well. But we've been able to sort of mitigate and hedge some risk there by having one versus the other.
Yeah, I think that's incredibly sensible and a sort of really good way of being able to balance your business, one that works better in the good times and one that works better in the bad times. So it sounds very sensible the way that you've approached it. Your family, are they all safe and they're all well?
Yeah, everyone's well. I mean, we have an interesting, I've got, myself and my wife and two kids. We live across the street from my parents, right? So I've got two older parents. We live about 5 miles outside of New York City. So we're in New Jersey. Yeah. But from the town that we live in, we can literally see, all of New York City. Yeah. Usually, we're there 4 or 5 times a week just for basic living. But it's kind of like the Gotham City that you can't go to. It's a weird sort of thing because to me it's like I'm a city guy and I like distraction and chaos and litter. Sometimes New York City sometimes is not as clean as it could be. But that's the epicenter of for the country for the COVID-19. Yeah. But we're healthy. We've always been careful. But it's just about I think being smart and life does go on, right? I've been blessed. I mean, I continue to work still. Yeah. Because here at least a lot of the buildings are closed, so you literally can't go into the buildings. Yeah. To work. I happen to have an office in a medical building, so it's a little more accessible for me. Yeah. But it's it's kind of an interesting thing, and hopefully, I don't know. I mean, based on what you'd see in China, right? It seems like they went from December, assuming they reported it correctly, but from December to about now, So, I'm assuming this is going to go out to June or July, right? As well as, I mean, right. And in the UK, you had your prime minister hanging out in
Boris
the,
Johnson had it as well. So,
in hospital
London
for a while.
London is the same as New York. It's lockdown. We can't go into our office buildings. We literally can't. We only go for medicine or food. Everything else shut down. So there's some major challenges for a lot of the sort of tourist industry and the retail and sort of restaurants. They're really, really struggling, but a lot of businesses have furloughed or they've made people work from home. So it's sort of working okay at the moment in London, but it's still a massive challenge for a lot of businesses.
And I think one of the, you definitely see a discrepancy between sort of the social classes, right? In terms of people that have a little bit of money and people that don't have anything, and how they struggle. And even in the health, I don't know if you've seen the differences in the health, the COVID-19 with the death rate, right? In terms of poverty versus, wealth. But I think a lot of the older people, they're, someone like you or me, I mean, we can kind of, if you need to buy something, you can do it from your phone. You're kind of used to it, right? It's not a big deal to order from an app. My parents, for example, I mean, they're very, quote unquote old school, and just shopping from his phone just seems like a foreign exercise. So I think a lot of the older people in general I think they're struggling, more than anything, right? To cope with this. We've done some things. I mean, we have, like, my wife is the designated shopper, and we've been pretty careful from an exposure standpoint. But I think, like the rest of the world, it's. I mean, obviously, I think first world countries are suffering, but I've seen we have a summer home in Peru, right? Mm-hmm. So there, the disparity between sort of wealth and poverty is really embellished, right? Yeah. And they've shut down. A lot of those people live day to day, and they've been literally in quarantine for 6 weeks now, 7 weeks, where they're not. I mean, that will be disastrous for a lot of the emerging market countries.
Yeah, I would totally agree. All right, let's talk about you, George. I think we've chewed the fat on how harsh COVID-19 has been for a lot of people. So let's go back to your origin story. So you did a finance degree at Seton Hall University. So talk a little bit about that, and also you did economics at Oxford University.
Right. So I initially, when I was sort of younger, I mean, like I said, I grew up near New York City. I had this concept to be an attorney and a lawyer. Right. I applied to one university, which is probably not a great concept if you're a student to just go for one. It happened to be Harvard, which I didn't get into, and Harvard Law. But that was sort of the later on story. But so I went to Seton Hall. I had a sort of passion for finance and accounting and economics, and then I had a chance to live in the UK for a bit. That was a great experience. And then I did kind of what you've done, right? I ended up in sort of a big four consulting firm, if you want to call it that, back then. Yeah. But and I did that, and I was had a great sort of career. This was sort of when financial mapping, and I don't know if sort of everything was sort of getting into the cloud, right? Where things were still in Excel, and they wanted to have these sort of data that you could access anywhere. Yeah. A lot of large corporations, this is in 1997 or something like that. It wasn't. It didn't really exist. So I started to travel a little bit. So I was in France for a little bit. Traveled quite a lot. And I did that for a couple of years. So I kind of had the typical work story. It wasn't, in my opinion, that exciting. I was in New York, and this is kind of what changed my life. I was in New York in January. This was in 2000, and I'm sorry, this was September of 1999. Yeah. I got a call from a recruiter, from a headhunter in Miami, and he said, "Hey, there's an opportunity. It's for a German company. They're in Miami. Can you come down and visit us?" I passed on it in January, right? So in January 2000, I don't know if you've been to New York in January, but it gets quite cold here, right? So it's kind of interesting compared to Miami.
Yeah.
Decided to sort of re-engage him, and then next thing you know, next day or 2 days later, I was in Miami with an offered hand, and 5 days later, I was working and living in Miami, right? Like it was a dream, sort of, right? And so I did that for 3 months, and then one day walked into the office, and the 50 people that were there, I think it was like 45 people, with sort of gloomy faces, said, "Hey, we're shutting down the Miami office. Germany has decided to just close the doors." So, we're sort of out of work. And that was it. I'd asked the girl next to me what to do, and she said, "Well, you need to go to the unemployment line," right? And that's what I did. So I went to the unemployment line and was sitting there and thinking, I've done everything I was supposed to do. I went to great universities, worked at great companies, and I'm still unemployed, And I thought this has to be, and I got to a point where I just didn't, quite frankly, like the consulting piece anymore. But I thought there has to be something better in life, But if I'm going to fail, I'd like to fail on my own terms. And right there, literally, I decided to start a business. I didn't know what business that was,
Right.
but I started looking, for work, and I started going to other recruiting firms. And next thing you know, I was sort of in the hot seat, and I've been doing that literally for 20 years. I mean, we're going to.
So let's just can I just take a step back?
Sure.
So you were queuing up to collect your benefits or whatever, or finding a job in an unemployment queue, and you sat there and you thought, "This is not for me. I need to do something on my own."
Exactly. And it was the first time in my life that I'd literally had, I mean, with the exception of maybe, not getting into a prestigious, law school or something like that. Mm-hmm. It was the first time in my life that I'd failed. I mean, I would say that I was pretty much, it was a low point for me, right? I thought the world would end it, right? Because I was in the unemployment line, which it hadn't. It had just begun. And that's exactly right. I just decided I didn't want it. If I was going to fail, I didn't want somebody else to be responsible for my own either success or failures, right? And I figured if I'm going to fail, then let it be my problem, not somebody else's. And that's exactly right. I think you get to a point, and I think this is sometimes you get to a point where you need these very low moments,
Absolutely.
And I don't know if the right word is pivot. I mean, you're hearing that a lot in the COVID-19 thing, but you need some sort of breaking point, and sometimes a breaking point is a positive thing. And I had that breaking, that moment where
it's really interesting because I've talked a lot over the last 6, 7, 8 months on my podcast about the worst times often lead to the best times, or you have to hit rock bottom to be able to bounce back, and various ways of being put in this. I personally had a lot of bereavement in the last 18 months, which has really triggered my drive for change and different approaches and different and it comes in all different types of ways. It might be losing your job currently, so I think it's really an inspiring story that you were at rock bottom, you were queuing up for a job, and that then just triggered you to think, I've got to do this on my own terms. I'm going to do something different.
We'll be back after a quick break.
Hi, I'm Alex, the host of X Health Show, Meet the Future of Healthcare. Think X-Men, that's X Health. Actual superheroes behind programming living cells to cure cancer once and for all. Tech that detects preterm delivery in seconds, brain-computer interface, or apps that employ AI to match your disease with the best treatment. X Health Show brings to you visionaries who push the boundaries of healthcare from Switzerland, the heart of Europe and the most innovative country in the world. Let me introduce you to their startups. Head to X Health Show, Meet the Future of Healthcare. Happy to greet you there.
Exactly. And I had the difficult problem because everyone that I had spoken to before I'd moved to Miami had told me, this is probably a bad idea. Like, do not do this. This is probably not this is not a smart thing to do. So to go back to them and tell them that they were correct, which they were, it was sort of, it was humbling. But at the same time, it changed my life. Right. So I thought, that I had sort of hit rock bottom, but I realized later, so, then you start a business, and you see this today on Instagram, and you see this in other social media sites. they sell it like when you have a business, it's like you're going to strike gold automatically, and it's not like that at all. I mean, I can tell you, for the first 3 years of that business, I struggled immensely. And then, year four, I was able to make more money in maybe 3 months than I'd made, and into 3 years before that. Right. So there was a point where I was able to figure it out, but I built the business up. Right. And this kind of segues into the people that are dealing with the coronavirus thing now, but I built it up to 2008. In 2008, all of my clients were banks and financial institutions, as well as, sort of insurance companies, global insurance. Those are all global companies. And so I built it up to 50 people, right? So, 2 offices, things were going well. And this is a tip for folks that are entrepreneurs. I was I was pretty good at bringing in revenue. I was terrible at, being sort of cash conscious of where the money went. Right. And you get to the point where you can only sort of, there's a point where you can't outsell your stupidity. Right. And that was kind of 2008. I get an email and then calls from in the same 48-hour period from, Bank of America. It was sort of Bank of America, UBS, Morgan Stanley, Wachovia, who's now Wells Fargo, saying we're going to put everything on hold for pretty much, forever. There's no business for the next year and a half. Right. And,
so another thing I talk about is that it's a 5-year project. Starting a business or starting a new venture, whatever it is, you can't expect to get to where you want to be in 6 months. It takes a while to establish clients. It takes a while to establish reputation, as well as skills and techniques, etc. So I always say on my podcast that you should be approaching this as a 5-year project to get to where you want to be. Don't just think it's going to happen in a short term. But it sounded like you went to success, or let's put inverted commas, success, and then 2008 recession happened. It was a global recession. Lehman Brothers disappeared. A lot of financial industries were struggling. So at that point, did you so you said off camera, you said that you dropped down to basically you as the business. How did you build that back up after that dip?
Right. So you get to a point, and that was a difficult time for me. You have to make a decision, and the decision pretty much it's pretty binary, right? It's, do I continue to work for myself, right, and build this up again, or do I go out and get a job? I mean, it's pretty much an A or B decision, right? Or 1 or 0 or 1, right? And I thought, you know what? Let me give this one more shot, but let me do it. Let me come up with and there's a couple of things I did wrong initially, right? I didn't have a real plan. It was more sort of based on instinct the first time. But I thought, if I could do this again, how would I do it differently, right? And I made up all these rules, it was sort of like these if-then statements, right? Yeah. It was, okay, I'm not going to have an office anymore. I'll be able to, work and travel anywhere I would like. Yeah. Everybody I will hire, I'll hire them either remotely or they can work from home. That will give me more access to talent all around the world. It will also, I won't have to really babysit. Instead of investing in rents and office chairs and birthday cakes, I'd rather invest in systems, right? So I decided, okay, I could do that. So that was the first piece. Second thing was, and this goes back to cash flow as a business owner, I decided to take 10% of every sale that I ever made, right? No matter how small or how big the amount, and put it into a cash, I call it the tithing fund, right? Sort of the McGehrin Group emergency. It's like an emergency account, cash fund. And since 2009, because it took me about a year to get, clients again, since 2009, we've been tithing 10% of every sale we've ever made into this cash account, right? So that was the second thing. The third thing that I did was I said, you know what, I'd like to be able to have, and this is, I don't know if the wording is correct, but I said, I'd like to have an environment where you can be sort of geographically agnostic. And, it's not the proper way to say this, but the idea is this, and it's the idea is you should be able to work anywhere, live anywhere, and sort of enjoy some of your life anywhere you'd like, right? So it doesn't matter where you are. This was a time when technology was starting to get really hot and you could do that.
Yeah.
And those were the three things. The fourth thing that I did, which as an entrepreneur, I didn't figure this out. I decided to have more than one type of industry, as well as revenue stream, in my portfolio. Right. So just instead of having just banks and financial institutions, I now we have big pharma, we do have banks and financial institutions, we have manufacturing, we have retail, we have commercial, real estate development, we have healthcare. So we have a pretty broad range of clients. And then the next thing I did was I said, I don't need to stick to the States here. I might as well get some global clients as well, right? Yeah. So we have mining client. We've got some. We're going after a deal right now in South Africa, right? So it's one of the largest mining clients, mining companies in the world, right? So so I just decided to think bigger but smarter with more strategy, and that by the way, that strategy today, you see people on Zoom and everything's about working remotely. We've been doing that since 2009, right?
Yeah,
so I have 30 people now. I would say my 30 people are, I'm not trying to knock the 50 I had before, but the 30 people we have now, we get more done. It's, better quality of life, things like that, right? In terms of our recruiting business going on pause until July, we're at a point where we're thinking about hiring. There's a lot of layoffs in the recruiting business, not from us. We're thinking about, hiring the folks that are getting laid off, because this is a great time because we're cash, we have the cash.
Yeah.
And this is only because I learned in 2008. Like I was already, this goes back to your lesson. I learned in 2000, I learned in 2008. It took me twice to figure that out. This is the third time. The third time I got it right, so it's, if you start a business and you're about to do something, I think it's really, really, really important to think about that if then, right? If this happens, then this, and do that, A, B, C, D, E, F, do that over and over. If you can do that, you save yourself years and years of a lot of heartache. And
I totally agree. I was listening to people on podcasts, like good people on podcasts, probably 2 years ago, saying we're probably due some sort of recession. You should be stockpiling an element of your transactions into cash.
Right.
And there were a lot of people who, in my opinion, less responsible as entrepreneurs, were just saying, no, cash is rubbish, just invest in property, invest in the stock exchange, just diversify as much as you can. And there were a couple of guys that I listened to that were saying, hold on a second, I get what they're saying, expansion is great, but a cash reserve in recession is a really, really strong position to be in, because you can get past that peak period or whatever the recession was going to be. So, and I don't think anyone really thought it was going to be a health pandemic, but I think there were some sensible people out there saying that we should be preparing for this, and he didn't know if it'd be 6 months, 12 months, 2 years, but you should be having an element of cash that's available to ride out these sorts of periods.
Right, and this will happen again. They might call it something else, right? Yeah. But it will happen again, right? So this is a good lesson if you've kind of been burnt now. I was burnt twice before I figured it out to some extent. And you made a comment about kind of you need 5 years to be able to build a business. This is just, I'm probably a slower learner. But we're, we've been in business now 20 years, which is like a miracle if you're an entrepreneur. To be able to hit 20 years is just to me, it's just a cool thing. By the way, one of the things I did in 2008, 2009, I said, you know what? I never thanked a client for literally paying me. I don't know if you have this as a practice, but I literally never said, thank you. Thank you for deciding to invest your money with me. Right. I never once did I say thank you in a genuine way, not in sort of a, superficial way, but in a genuine. So we thank every customer. Really thank you for taking, investing your time and your money in us and believing in us. And we always say thank you. Doesn't matter how big or small the deal is. But I think there's a gratefulness that you need to understand, that there is a lot of money out there, but other people can give it to other people, they don't have to give it to you. And,
so I was also, we're going on a real tangent, but I was talking to one of my friends. He's in investment at the moment, and he's been in for the last maybe 4 years. And we were having a chat about his business and about how he was going to cope with the situation we found ourselves in. And he actually had a cash reserve. But he said to me, but all we are saying to our clients is, don't expand, sit tight, sit on your cash reserves and just wait it out. And I said to him, which he took away, and I thought it was quite a powerful point, so that's why I'm raising it, is if you give good advice to your clients in a recession or in the bad times, they'll stick with you. Like if you're not trying to make money out of them when they are strapped financially or struggling financially and they come out the other end, they'll be your client forever because you've navigated them through a really tricky time and you've not taken advantage of them and you've kept strong relationships with them. They'll stick with you.
Well, and I'm going to tell a story about that. This has happened to me over and over, but there's one story in general that I had somebody who was a client of mine. He was on the west coast of the States here. We did we did lots and lots of business together. I mean, just lots of business, right? Mm. And he found an opportunity in the Northeast, so he found an opportunity in New York, and he ended up at a very large it was actually a European company. And we were supposed to, he said, George, let's do, we're going to continue to do business together. And we've done business for years. He was there for about 2 weeks and, just, I don't know what happened. But his boss was a little quirky. He was let go within 2 weeks of just literally relocating the whole family, right. From out West to New York. I mean, it was just, they had paid him a sort of a sign-on bonus. And it was it was an expensive mistake for the company as well. He was literally, and so then he said, George, I need some help. Can you help me? We decided to meet, every couple of weeks in New York City for a quick drink. During one of our drink sessions, you want to call it that, I said, listen, I've got a client of mine. They're a very large European company as well. Why don't I send an email? I won't charge them a fee. I'm just going to make an introduction. Maybe they can bring you on. And the next day he was interviewing there. He worked there for a year as a consultant, right? It was a six-figure, I think it was like a $300,000 deal for him, right? We didn't take any, we took zero commission. We told the client, we're not going to charge for this, just a sort of a friend. And that was it, right? He ended up someplace else and they're one of our best clients right now. I mean, last year they gave us about $1 million, right? So it's not about, it's not about sort of the I guess hypocrisy. It's more about being genuine and being engaged with your clients, right? And really actually caring about them. And there's a line, right? When you care, you don't care. But if you can really, really care, like you're saying, like that's a long-term relationship that him and I have, and we're friends now, right? So it's a beautiful thing, I think, when you can turn your clients into friends. Yeah. And that's how you build a long-term business. But I agree. I mean, going back to the cash thing, I heard some guy, there's other guys on, there was one guy that used to say, I mean, I actually follow him quite a lot and we spoke about, cash is trash. I don't know if you've heard that before, but, I don't know. I mean, I'm pretty happy that I've got some cash, and, it's, it's a good thing. But I think we're going to see this again. They're just going to call it something else, right? Like it might be something else. The other thing, which is really interesting, is that, we think that you live in this bubble. Like you're in London, I'm in New York. What I do doesn't affect you. I mean, if you look at this, somebody in Wuhan, China, right? Is affecting both of us, right? So the world is so interconnected.
Absolutely. Globalization happened like late 90s, early noughties, and it's just changed the world. The fact that someone ate a bat in a market in that
you'd never heard of, right? Exactly.
You'd never heard of Wuhan before this week, and how it's affected it just shows you global. I think the UK has been affected, not proportionally more, but I think the UK has been affected because it is more of a global centre for finance and for other things that we've been hit maybe a little bit harder. I think New York is the same. There's a lot of travel in people in New York, right. Europe, and South America. And
exactly. But I tell you the difference between, for example, the markets in London 2008, 2009, and here in New York and versus now, in my opinion, is 2008, 2009, I mean, guys like me and you sort of lost their shirts, right? And our buddies and everything else, right? But the person that cut your hair, right? Or the person that would sell you coffee on the street corner, or the kebab guy, right?
Yeah.
With the awesome garlic sauce, right? Like, they still had a job and they were still working.
Yeah.
The difference now is that these people are not working, right?
Yeah.
So it's, there's a part of I would say the world. I mean, that portion of people, they're just not working. And I think that's one of the major differences. And that's why people care about this more than, maybe, and then 2008, 2009 it was a news, it was sort of I was in the news, right? But there were still, the school still worked well, right? I mean, people were still in the school, the transportation system still worked. You could do anything. The parks were open, you could do anything. The pubs were open. But now it's affecting the pub owner, the person that works for the metro station, right? It affects the person that sort of takes care of the park, the garden, at the park, right? So things like that. I just, I think it's different scale, this pandemic.
Yeah, I would 100% agree. Okay, let's take a little slightly different tack. So you were quoted as being in the top 30 most connected recruiters in the US, according to LinkedIn. So how did you do that? Was it as a strategy, or was it part of the business that just developed you into that sort of connected person?
No, it was. I mean, it was a little bit of both, but it was more strategy than I would say than luck, right? So. This was in, and I'm right now I'm maxed out at 30,000 connections, right?
Okay.
LinkedIn, there's a maximum amount.
Yeah.
I was sitting, and I was in San Francisco. I through my career, I've had a lot of Silicon Valley startups, right? As clients, right? So, and some of my clients, by the way, give you an idea, which, this is before people knew who they were. Spotify, Uber, Box, Dropbox. I mean, you name it. I mean, I've had a lot of interesting clients. Facebook when they had like 600 employees or 500 employees. So this is back in the day. But I was in San Francisco, right in the Bay Area, and I was at a bar, and I was sitting next to a guy who happened to work for LinkedIn. Okay, this is in 2004, right? So he was the VP of engineering, and we started talking, and I said, I've got like 400 contacts, and I only connect to people that I know. And he said to me, George, that's a mistake, because LinkedIn is based on the 6 degrees of separation. And the more people that you connect to, the more access you'll have to the information. You'll have more access to information. They'll have more access to you. It just makes more sense, right? Like, okay, interesting. He said, you need to connect to everybody. And I was like, okay, interesting concept. But I thought, he's the guy that's running, he's the VP of engineering at LinkedIn. He must know something. So that's what I did. I sent out, back then there was this thing where you could import all of your contacts, and LinkedIn would send it an invite, to your friends. I guess I sent it to people I didn't know, and I was getting this, this thing on LinkedIn saying, if you've gotten too many rejections, we're gonna lock your account, right? Wow. So using LinkedIn's own sort of system. Yeah. But okay, this isn't good. This is in 2005. I decided to say, you know what? Let me email everybody on the side, right? Not using the LinkedIn system, saying, hey, my name's George. I run a recruiting company. We should connect. I'm out of, I can't connect with you, but if you want to just, send me an invite, I can do that. So then I started getting invites, right? And I literally I think I got something like 20,000 invites in like a 3-month period, right? Right. And I had to hire somebody to just accept them, all of them. And that was sort of the beginning of it, right? And this is before they had licenses to buy. You couldn't, it was the more contacts that you had in 2008, 2009, 2010, the more access you had to LinkedIn and to see other people, right? And in my world, right, in recruiting, it's all about how can you get to somebody and how can you at least start an initial conversation. And that was the beginning of it, and then just maxed out. We have a problem now where we have to sort of remove maybe 1,000 people to add on another 1,000. It's always, we're constantly trying to figure that out, but that's kind of that's where that comes from. So it was more of a just a handicap on LinkedIn side that we turned into an advantage on our side. So
interesting. So you've been involved in recruitment for 20 years?
Yes.
20 years?
Yep.
So How do you analyze what a company needs when they're looking for a CEO or a CFO or a COO?
Right. So that's a terrific question. The first piece was, and it's as important as probably the second piece, but for me, I think the first piece is culture, right? Does that person culturally fit in?
Yeah.
And that's a big, and I mean, you work at a quite large organization. It's a lot of times, and you've interviewed a lot of people. Culture is a huge issue, right? So, number one, do they culturally fit in? Number two, I would say, so at the executive level, there's usually, and this is when we vet the company in terms of, asking them what are the 3 or 4 things that you need, sort of in a perfect candidate per se.
Yeah.
Does this person solve the 3 or 4 main problems that you have right now, right? And have they solved that problem? That's the second piece. So it comes down to experience, right? The third thing is, there's a lot of these companies are looking for people that understand how to scale and run global teams to some extent, right? So there's a third piece. So it's pretty much comes down to culturally, does the person fit? Number 2, does this person come from an existing competitor, or have they run a similar business, right? Where they can do this? And number 3, is it in terms of, can they scale and grow the business? There are a lot of cases where people don't fit those things, right? I don't know if you followed the CEO at T-Mobile. Have you followed his? He was sort of wacky, kind of, I always pronounce his name wrong, but it's Legier, right? John Legier. He didn't really fit in culturally for T-Mobile, very sort of European, and he's kind of taken their stock and just, he's done great things with it. But I would say it comes out of culture fit as well as sort of leadership style. And the third thing is, have they done it before, right? So it's an easier task said than done. And the other thing is, the other problem, there's a lot of variables involved. There's board members that are involved in this. There's sort of a lot of these are, there's a lot of confidential searches, right? A lot of times when you read something in the newspaper about XYZ, person is hired, there's a search going on for a new president. Usually the deal's already been done, or it's in line. It's already lined up, right? So they're trying to set expectation for the audience so that, the public can expect somebody new. So it's the behind the scenes is, I've seen the news article, after the deal has happened,
and it's almost too late because the deal's been done. Are you saying?
Right. Well, sometimes I'm part of that deal, right? But I see it, and they sometimes they'll say, George, by the way, make sure you tell Michael or tell Sally, just so we're going to do a couple of these press releases, but not to get worried, right? Because sometimes the candidate doesn't really, the candidate thinks something's gone on, gone sort of, gone wrong, sort of it's gone, the deal's gone south. But culturally, it's a big deal, right? I mean, it's the same way. I'm a firm believer that, the employment market and the job market is exactly like the relationship market in terms of, you try to, it's very similar, right? In terms of people, people hire people they like, they work with people they like, and, in theory, they marry people they like, in theory, right?
In theory.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes there's like these arranged marriages, but, it kind of goes to the same metaphor, right? In terms of sometimes people are hired that other folks don't like, but they're sort of forced into these hires. The other thing, and this is something, I don't know if you've talked about this in your show, but, the M&A piece, right? So let's say there's a takeover, one company buys the next. Sometimes, it's like you've got 2 CEOs. Well, one guy kind of gets paid to stay, one guy gets paid to take it over, right? Or one guy gets paid to leave, the other guy gets paid to. So, but they still do judge it based on the criteria of culture.
Right. So how has the recruitment industry changed over the last 20 years?
Well, it's definitely more automated, right? It's quicker. The difference now between, let's say, like today versus 20 years ago is, I think a lot of the searches were local, right? So they're very localized. So, if you were in London and you were looking for a CFO in London, CFO, the role was in London, you wouldn't be calling somebody in I don't know, in Sweden or in Holland, right? For the role, you'd probably be calling folks that are just in the UK, right? Or, and you just wouldn't have access to that kind of network. Here in the States, I mean, we have searches that are going on where we're dealing, we have Europeans that we're talking to, guys from Europe that, for deals that are in New York or even Los Angeles, and that was just unfathomable. Like that didn't happen 20 years ago, right? It was just, you were limited to your own localized market a lot of times. And sometimes the market was, was larger than others, but that's the big thing. Technology has changed that a lot. The access to travel and the access to, for example, Zoom calls, right? I mean, it just, that's changed a lot. But, on the flip side, I would say that the candidates as well, they can now go in better prepared, right? They can do more homework.
Yeah.
There's also more opportunities for them, but there's also more competition. So, I don't know if there's much of an advantage for anyone. I think everything sort of leveled itself out in that sense, but the scalability of it is much, much easier, in terms of the type of talent. Think about this. 20 years ago, you and I would not be speaking right now on a podcast, right? It was impossible, right? So, I'd be dialing in, right? And you'd have a radio show or something like that, right?
Yeah.
And, I don't even know the format. I don't know, how this would have looked 20 years ago, but it's just the world is a lot smaller, and that's affecting, how people hire.
Well, this is one of the reasons why I love podcasts, is that, as you say, if you're doing a radio show, you'd be dialing in, you'd be calling a central number, we'd be speaking for 5 to 10 minutes about some sound bites about the current climate, and it'd be, thank you very much, George, thank you for your time. The podcast industry has started to boom, had its sort of second wave since about 2014, 2015, where globally it's now more of interest. And we can sit down and we can spend an hour and really chew the fat about current climates, your industry, things that you're interested in, things that have happened in your life. So this is why I love podcasts, because you can really go into in-depth about things, and it's not just a short sound bite for the news on a radio show or on a TV show.
Exactly. And 20 years ago, you having me as a guest, I wasn't relevant to your audience, right? Mm-hmm. Because it wasn't like your audience would have been just very localized, and and vice versa, right? And I just think that it's the world is so much smaller. I think I'm sort of spoiled. Coming from New York, where there's a lot of different people from all over the world, and usually, in general, you just don't ask them where they're from. You just assume they live in New York, and even if they're on holiday. But the world is so much smaller now that it's like, and by the way, I've been on quite a lot of podcasts. And I'll be on a lot more in 2020. I'm on a lot of podcasts from on the European side, right? Because what I'm saying is relevant to somebody who lives in Prague. It's relevant to somebody who lives in Germany. It's relevant to somebody who lives in Cape Town, right, in South Africa. So it's 20 years ago it probably wasn't, and and I'm also listening to shows that are just not domestic. So yeah.
My listening is US, mainly US and UK. I must admit that's primarily where I listen to most of my podcasts. But as you say, the relevance to South Africa or Asia for recruiters. Recruiting, especially at a senior level, is a process which is done all around the world.
Right. Exactly. I was on, just to give you an idea. I was on a call. So this morning I was on three. So it was 3 calls. It was like 6 calls in total. 3. One guy was from Dublin, another guy was from France, right, and the other guy was from London, right. So it was kind of, it's just 20 years ago that wouldn't have happened, right. I would have been on 6. I would have been on 6 different calls. 3, they would have all been from New York or Miami. Where it's so much smaller now.
Yeah. All right, we're going to jump around a little bit now. So what was it like? Or you spent 3 months helping with the 9/11 cleanup. How was that? It must have been quite traumatic.
Yeah, that was, I think, this is one of these things where you go into it thinking that you're going to learn one thing or achieve one sort of objective, and then you leave with a different one. So just to preface this, the world, I still call it now it's called Freedom Tower, but the World Trade Center for me was, when I was like 18, 19, we would go there. My friends and I would meet there on top of, there was a restaurant called Windows of the World. And so it was a restaurant. You could see all of New York City. It was just beautiful. We would meet there, and that's where we would have our first drink, before we would decide kind of where to go out. Right. And there wasn't sort of, you would go up in the elevator, and there wasn't a security line, or you didn't have to buy a ticket, just sort of, you just go up. Right. Yeah. And so there's sort of I guess an emotional, thing for me. Everybody in the town that I live in, for example, I mean, obviously I lived, we came back to the town that I'm in now because I've got older parents, but most people, everybody, for example, on my street right now, 95% of the people work in New York City. So it's one of these sleeper communities, where most people, it's a 20-minute train ride in New York City. You can get there by car for 9 minutes on a weekend with no traffic. I mean, it's extremely close. So, we've always sort of attached to the city. There was an opportunity, when the World Trade Centers went down. I had a friend of mine who had an environmental science, company, and he said, George, there's an opportunity to work with the cleanup. They're going to take the remains and the material and bring it to a dump site, right? Yeah. They called it. They've changed the name later on. They called it Fresh Kills. That was the actual name of the dump site, right? It's called Fresh Kills. Okay. Yeah. So they changed the name. I don't know what the name is now, but it was called Fresh Kills. And they were bringing all of this material because it was a crime scene. Still, they would bring it to this area, and then they would process it and they would look for it and things like that. So I had this opportunity. I had a very simple job. It was inside of a tent. I was putting on what you would call PPE, right? PPP, the protective gear on people before they would go out to this sort of, some of this material was kind of, it was just cancerous. It was just so that's what I did for 3 months. And it was 12 hours a day, 6 days a week. The interesting thing, and there was 2 things that impacted me greatly. Every day before the shift, they would say a prayer. And these were like seasoned, FBI folks, seasoned firefighters, seasoned police officers. And they would say a prayer, and these guys would just cry, like you see these people that are just so used to crime and tragedy, and they would just bawl. I mean, it was impossible. I mean, I would just tell myself, I'm not going to cry today. It never happened. I mean, I cried the whole time, for 90 days. So the other thing was, we walked around you get to see kind of some of the damage that was done, right? And they would put things on conveyor belts, and the things you would see on the conveyor belts, I mean, I wouldn't wish it. It was terrible. They had fire trucks literally stacked on top of each other. That must have had 10 fire trucks, and it was unbelievable how diminished they were, right? Mm-hmm. And pairs of, we say sneakers, right? So pairs of trainers, right? Kids trainers with parts. It was just terrible to see, and the destruction that was done. It just makes you appreciate life, it makes you appreciate what's important. It makes you appreciate that, if you build a business or you work for somebody or you work for a company, like life is very short, and it's not about the money. It's not about, it's about pretty much about family and experience. And, you could go to work one day and just not come back. And, we had a lot of people in my town that just didn't make it. They just, they were people I studied with. Their parents, were some of them were, they worked for financial institutions, and it's just an impactful thing. Right. I don't know. It's. I don't know if I would do it again. Quite frankly, it was pretty traumatizing. Yeah. But when I go there now, I definitely appreciate the Freedom Tower when I see it. Yeah. It's a little different for me than maybe somebody that hasn't experienced that. It's. I don't know. It's a pretty cruel thing. Like, I don't know why. I know everyone has their sort of differences in religion, but I think at the end of the day, most religions are just be nice to your neighbor. And I just sometimes when it gets to extremism, just these extremists, no matter what religion it is. It's just a cruel thing to see that, like there's a lot of innocent people. But to see it, it was like, you see it in a movie, but to see it live and the smell of it, it was a nightmare,
Did you have any sort of support afterwards? Did they arrange for you to have counseling or sort of maybe bereavement support? Did you have any?
They did, and I didn't take advantage of that. Another piece was they had there was also, I was, there's a lot of people that got sick because of a lot of lung problems and respiratory problems, right? Because of all the metals and just I was exposed to some of that. There was a big class action suit that I was technically, I don't really know that. I haven't really looked into it that much, but I haven't had any problems, luckily. But there are some people that were literally at that site, that the same site I was at, that have had problems, right? That have passed away. So yeah, it's just, there's a lot of people that got sick because they were helping out. But it's the one thing, and I'm not, I've been all around the world, so I'm sort of a global citizen, if more than anything. But to see sort of the city and just kind of pick itself up and say, like, hey, we're not gonna be knocked down by this. We might be on the ground for a little bit, but we're gonna get up. And I think it's the resiliency of a country and a culture, and the UK has had that over and over, right? There's been lots of stories where things have just been pummeled. And
it wasn't as severe, but in the UK we had in London we had bombings east, west, north, and south of London.
It's you had that, and you've had the fire. It's like in London. It's just, you've had a lot of. There's been a lot of that. It's just people get up at the end, right? But it was
always do.
It was a life-changing experience. It wasn't. And talking about, like, I thought I was going to go there and pretty much collect and help out a little bit and get paid for it, and and kind of, okay, it was something different, and I could later on, it was an experience. It was a check mark on the experience thing, and I left kind of thinking, like, you're just it's almost like you're in shock, and I don't know. I don't know if I can ever explain it properly. It's hard for me to, and quite frankly, it's hard for me to explain it to somebody that hasn't been there. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But to see these guys, I don't know, just to see these hardcore, just veterans crying. It was just unbelievable, the amount of tears, and rightfully so. Like it was just an emotional time.
Yeah,
so
absolutely. And all our thoughts and prayers go out to all the families that are sometimes still affected now.
Thank you. Thank you.
Illness.
And by the way, this is if you see it, you'll see it too. You'll see it in these, if you're a tourist and you're ever in like New Jersey or New York, and some of these, you'll see it if you walk by a fire station. Sometimes things go back so quickly you don't see it. But next time if you're in the city, if you're in New York City and you walk by a fire station, let's say, you'll see a plaque, and they'll have all the names of the people that have passed away who were there. Or you'll see an occasional, just a plaque in a park, and it's, if you look for it, it's there. It's literally littered all around New York City, all of these people that have passed away because of it. And it's amazing. It still doesn't, every time I walk by a fire station, I always look for that plaque, and you see them. They're everywhere. It's everywhere. So yeah, thank you for that.
Right. So you, in your current role, coach clients. So what's the most important thing for coaching clients in your view?
So I guess is the question, is the most important for them or for the person giving or receive? Like,
I think it sort of goes both ways. What's the most important thing for you for choosing or being referred to clients, and what's the most important thing for the clients to sort of enhance their careers or change their lives, or what's the most important factors?
So two things. So I would say, if you're taking on new clients, right? I think it's number one, and this even goes towards sort of the initial conversations before they become your clients. So maybe they're a prospect, right? I think it's understanding the exact 2 or 3 problems that they need to solve, right? And sometimes that means they don't really know the problems that they need to solve, or they think that they're trying to solve 1 or 2 problems, and you need to guide them to solve the other problems, right? So I think it's really determining that. Is like, at the end of the day, what problems do they really? So it's it goes to really you're counseling them, right? You're counseling them, and that's why they're paying you. They're engaging you so that you can give them sort of best practices but also, guide them through what might be obvious to you, but it's not obvious to them. So I think number one is kind of trying to understand what are the 2 or 3, main pain points they have on their side, right? On their side. And, I would say it makes sense to have some sort of end game. It's like you need to know your end game with your coach, right? So and I think it's a great question. You can, as a coach, you can actually, or if you're working with people one-on-one, you can ask them, like, what is your end game? And they'll tell you. But I think it's good for the other person to know the end game as well. And that kind of leads, that's sort of the macro of it. Sometimes when you get into the micro, you learn very quickly that all of that, stuff, quote unquote stuff, is just not really relevant, and you need to kind of like, okay, I need to repackage this and rethink this. And sometimes the end game is version B or version C of it, right? So, but I think those 2 things. I mean, you need to understand what 2 or 3 problems your client needs to solve. Sometimes they don't know the answer to that, and they need to know what their end game is. So it's sort of a philosophical approach, but it's those are 2 things. And the third thing is, I think that I'm this is me, but I'm not really the cheerleader type, which is probably, like I'm more about giving good counsel to my clients, right? So sometimes, you have to know who you're hiring, and there are people out there that are, they're better on the cheerleader side than others, right?
Yeah.
I think it's also important, if you're going to hire somebody, to know if the personalities fit and make sure there's not sort of any discord there.
I think that's incredibly sensible. I've had a mentor, a coach for a number of years now, and we've sort of evolved sort of what my priorities are, and things have slightly tweaked, things have slightly changed. But the actual relationship, so I trust him, I trust his view on things, and also for me, the rapport is very good. I think that's important. You need to be able to trust them, but you need to have the right rapport with your coach as well. And I always say to him, like, he has a certain approach, which is sometimes a little bit unconventional. Right. And I now have learned that I have to interpret his words and put them into my words. And I think that's why I'm still of interest to him, is because I'm not just repeating what he said. I'm actually thoughtful enough to actually say, well, that will not work for Mark. I need to slightly change it so it works for me as well. So I think the relationship between a coach is a very important one, to be able to have the right rapport and the right trust, but equally you got to be able to package it as yourself.
Right. And I know I'd like to add something, and this is actually lined, to the entrepreneur, right? Mm-hmm. This took me a long time to learn, but I think coaches are extremely, extremely important. I mean, I have somebody I work with too. I work with them twice a month, right? It's an hour, each session. It's a phone call. Mm-hmm. You have to invest money in yourself, to be able to grow your business. Like it's just, we have teachers throughout lots of stages in our life, right? We have, so we've got, I say teachers, but they're pretty much coaches, right? So, yeah. You're sort of in school, you have a teacher, you go to university, you have a teacher, you play sports, you have a coach, we have all these different coaches. At home, we have parents, if we're lucky, right? So we've got 2 parents if you're lucky, and, you've got grandparents, and sometimes our friends are our coaches. But we get into the work world, right, or we start a business and we're sort of by ourselves. And logically, I know it's kind of, sometimes it's difficult because there's sort of, you say, I don't have the money to do it. When I get the money, I'll hire somebody. But sometimes sometimes you'll get the money when, you will get the money when you hire somebody that can actually counsel you properly, so you get the money, right? So my businesses, by the way, and we talked about, it took me a while to learn this. So I've had these businesses for 20 years. For the last 5 years, I've been able to live exactly the way people, some of these books, the way they sell it. Yeah. And, with a couple, I work a couple hours a day, and, I have a team, and I get to do kind of the important stuff and visionary things. And, that's only because I hired a coach to tell me, hey, George, like, why are you doing these tasks? Like, why don't just hire somebody to operate your business or hire somebody to do that? And, it was just, I think coaches are extremely, extremely important. And the quicker you can get somebody, the quicker you'll become more, you'll find success much quicker, right? Like
absolutely.
And I wish if you were to ask me like, hey, if I could, do one thing again, if let's say that I've got 2 children, and you'd say, George, if you could do anything for your kids when they started a business, what would you do? The first thing I would do would be I would pay for a coach. Like that would be before I got them office space, before I bought them a new computer, before I money for a brochure or for Google or Facebook advertising, if that's even a thing. And in 10 years, I'd hire them a coach. Right, that's the first thing I would do. So.
I 100%. I talk on my podcast a lot about the need for coaches or mentors to be able to, someone that's further ahead in their career often is very, very useful. So they've been through the steps that you need to go through. I spent a large proportion of my 20s without any sort of coach or mentor, and I wouldn't say I struggled. You just move along. You keep going along on the conveyor belt of working for a corporate, but it was a game changer getting a mentor for me. And,
I can tell you, Mark. I mean, you've been working corporate for how many years now?
Probably about 14, 15 years.
Yeah, I mean, you look terrific for 14. I mean, it's you still look, you look like you're in your 20s still, which is a good, it's a good thing, right? Like you're, especially, you're in a high stakes, world, right? So it's good that you haven't aged. You're still in your 20s, at least physically, appearance wise, right? Which is good.
Thank you. So I've got 2 questions left, and I'm not sure which one to approach first because they're both important. I'm going to go with the one that's more related to what we've been discussing. So, how has talent changed in the last 20 years? Because it's now talent is sometimes traveling, is living in another country, is working in a particular area. But how has talent from a recruitment side changed in the last 20 years?
Well, I mean, I can tell you this. I mean, the older people, the older folks, right? So let's say, I'm saying older. I mean, not, I'm 45, so I'm not. But I would say, sort of I guess I would say, I guess I'm considered generation. I'm Generation X, I guess, right? So the non-millennials, I would say there's a portion of them are somewhat confused, like how to how to approach the marketplace now, right? So I get a lot of questions from somebody's in their 50s, like, George, I've never had to look for a job before. How do I do this? And they've been successful for 30 years looking for a job. They haven't thought about it. And then you've got the younger folks, like the millennials. A lot of them, I'm generalizing here, but there's a lot of folks that are just very distracted, and they have a concept of not having to pay the dues, right, to get success. And I just think there's a sense of ignorance to some extent. And I think that maybe maybe for some this was actually a great time for them to learn. When you talk about hitting your low point, I think that the first piece is there is a big difference between some of the millennials and the non-millennials, right, in terms of the way they work. And they sometimes these two groups clash, right, where it's like the 55-year-old guy doesn't know how to deal with a 32-year-old person he just hired. And he's also doesn't know how to get the attention, and 32-year-old's on his phone or her phone, and the 55-year-old sees it as rude, right? So, I think that's one piece. Talent has also changed in the sense of I don't know if you've seen this, but there is sort of this trend of you don't need to go to university, you can do your own thing. Have you seen that lately?
Yeah, there's a lot of people who are saying university is a waste of money.
Yeah, and I don't know. I mean, I think you and I are sort of biased in this, but I think university is great because it teaches you how to be disciplined. It teaches how to write well, for most people, right? Yeah. It teaches how to organize thoughts. It teaches you how to cordially disagree, right? I think there's a lot of things that you can learn besides what you study. And you can, I mean, this, you see an email from somebody or a text message, you can see right away if somebody pretty much went to the university or not. And usually, right? I mean, you can see.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah.
I mean, it's sort of like this innate ability to say, okay, this person has studies or not. But I've noticed that's a trend in terms of people are saying, don't go to don't go to university, right? You don't need to. And I don't know if that's exactly good advice. I can tell you this: at the higher level, we can't show any. I mean, we just don't show candidates to any client that didn't go to university. And it's not that we're against it. I've got two brothers. One went to like a 2-year school. The other didn't go to university. So I'm not. None of my grandparents went to university. So I'm not. But it's just the clients, the organizations. They still want to hire. They want to hire educated folks, right? So that's the second thing I've seen a lot of, and not just I've seen that globally, and I think it's a big mistake. So even if you're, if you can finish your university degree and just finish it, it's a very useful thing later on as an insurance policy. The third thing is just the marketplace, like the talent is, if you're in England, I mean, you can. I've got, just to give you an idea. I mean, I've got a couple of people that work for me. They actually live in the UK, right? And that's a cool thing. I mean, there's a lot of, you can, if you're open for it, you can be exposed to other cultures and without having to leave home, right? So you can live in the UK, you can live in Spain, you can live wherever, and you can work for a company in the US, or you can work for a company in Australia.
Yeah.
So I think the talent, because of the remote sort of situation, someone in the UK can now hang out and work for an American company and not never have to live in America, right? If they don't want to, right? So that's changed too. I think those are the three things. I think it's sort of the disconnect between the old and the younger, the second piece of just the educational advice, and then the third piece is you see it's really a global workforce more than just a localized one.
Absolutely. How does an employee know when and where their next big move is?
Ooh, great question. I don't know the answer to that. For me, it's a lot of it's, and I base things on instinct a lot, and then I beta test that instinct.
Yeah.
I can tell you how people decide these things. I mean, I don't know. I think it's hard to answer that because everyone's sort of different, but most people sort of, folks that are a little more established, they think about the risk. They think about the financial upgain, and finance. Usually, it's proven that most people do not move. They're not going to move because of the financial piece alone, right? The opportunity. I mean, you have to be in an industry. This is, I think, important. You have to be in a vehicle that lets you excel. And if you're not in a vehicle that lets you excel, then that means then you should try to play offense rather than defense. There's a great example of like the print, like the printing industry, right? Newspapers, and the digitals and the printing, the ad space. There were a portion of people that said, you know what, this is going to go on the internet one day. Let me move to that space. And those now are they've been the pioneers of this, right? Yeah. So I think you have to be in a vehicle. You could be a terrific salesperson, but if you're in an environment where you're not able to financially benefit or serve your client, or it doesn't pay well, then you could just switch industries. As well. There was a question, by the way, that I was asked on a different podcast, which I think is relevant to your question. Is like, and they asked me this question, like, what happens if you're stagnant and you're certain, like you work for a great company, so let's say you work for a great company and you're stagnant at this like director role, or you're this senior manager role, and you're getting passed up on promotions. What do you do, right? Sometimes the easiest thing is just to go for you can switch out companies, go for a VP role. You can sort of upgrade, just by switching companies. Number two, staying in a company too long, is sometimes not financially beneficial. Like statistically, it's proven if you're a steady Eddie, you make less than if you move every couple of years. A couple of years would be 4 or 5 or 10 years, right? So it's you have to be strategic in terms of your career movement, but staying at the same place forever is terrible advice.
Yeah. So I was at the same company for about 13 years, and
do you agree? Do you agree with the financial part of that I mentioned? Yeah.
So risk and finance and being able to excel, I think, are critical for the next move. What I was going to say was, I could have continued to have a really good career at the other company that I was at. I was doing well. I was getting promoted. Everything was fine. Well, it was good, but I needed and wanted a change. And so I looked and I got myself another job. And I think the actual experience of going through having interviews, I had interviews with a couple of different companies. We had conversations, like off the books conversations, as well as sort of formal interviews and stuff. And actually going through that process, I think was really beneficial for me, because I sort of understood and appreciated the job and the career and the sort of where you were going as a trajectory of your career. The other thing I was just about to say was, I spoke to a relative of mine, my aunt, and she had been at the same bank for 26 years. And I met her, we had Sunday lunch, and we were sitting down talking, and I was like, I just had the other offer. I was really umming and ahhing whether to go. And she wasn't the defining, but I felt it was interesting. She said to me, I've had a great career, but I've not reached the total of my potential, because I've been at the same company for 26 years and people overlook you because, as you described them, as a steady Eddie, and they're going to stay, they're not going to rock the boat, they're just going to toe the party line. And I kind of thought, lots of other reasons, but one of the reasons was I thought about her, and I thought to myself, that's such an important thing, because actually change of culture, change of atmosphere, change of people, sometimes change of role slightly, really changes your perspective on your job and your career and where you're going. So I actually think it is quite healthy to move. I also, back to my point on the business, I think you've got to stay somewhere, as long as there's not a boss that's unfair or causing you problems. Again, it's a sort of 5-year sort of term to really establish yourself in the company and make yourself prosperous and excel and be good at your job. Does take time as well. So I sort of sit in the sort of middle ground of now, in that, yes, these millennials are moving every 2 years and they might have a career progression very, very good, but I think you have to establish, what we talked about right at the start, relationships are really important. And just because you leave a company doesn't mean those relationships stop for whatever reason. You never know when someone else is going to impact your life that you previously worked with. So, right. So I think it is important. And I think these steady eddies, some people are happy with their choice, but I think changing company is really refreshing for your career.
Well, here's the issue with, for example, your aunt, right? So 26 years, the same place. And I see this sometimes on the other side of this when I'm dealing with people they've been in the same place, and now they're looking at maybe they've been furloughed or not, but the perception when they start interviewing in new places is that they only know, they're sort of like a one-trick pony, right? And it actually becomes a disadvantage. Because they only know one thing, and then it becomes, they have to sort of upsell, working in a startup environment within the same place for 26 years. So then they become, they're sort of less attractive. Right. And, that's the other thing too. And I would say another part is, can you imagine, I mean, you know this because you went through this. I mean, 13 years, right? 12, 13 years. I mean, you were pretty rusty in terms of interviewing, right? It was pretty, I mean, it's because you're and most times you were on the other side of that table, and there's the practice part of it as well. But the steady Eddie thing, I mean, if you stay too long, it just doesn't pay. If you're job, we call them job hoppy. If you hop around, it also doesn't pay. But there is a fine line. I can tell you this. I mean, in the 20 years that I've had my business, I think it's taken me 16 years to actually figure out the system and figure out sort of the secret sauce, right? So, there's a learning curve. Everybody has their own kind of, their own learning curve, but it took me about 16 years to get it right, I would say. Something that's sustainable, right? So, you need to stay you need to stay at a place long enough to be able to kind of to learn and also contribute and add value to others.
Yeah.
So that, it makes sense to move.
Awesome. Thank you. So we're coming to the end of the podcast. I asked the 5 same questions to all of my guests. They're quick fire questions, but they don't need a quick fire answer, depending on what you want to tell me. The first question is, what was the best decision that you made?
Best decision that I made, I would say it was probably hiring a coach a couple of years ago, after I got to a point where I thought, okay, I could just continue like this and, and carry on, or I could take it to the next level. And it was probably the best money I've spent, hiring a coach years ago.
Good. Next question is, what's the best advice you've been given?
The best advice that I've given, the best advice that I've been given.
Yes.
There's a, and this is, this is more of the entrepreneurial spirit side of it, but there's a saying that they say, sort of you're either, and I'm going to paraphrase this for a little bit, but you're either sort of contributing to somebody else's dreams, right, or living your own, right? Yeah. So, that's kind of, for me, that's why I like to be in business, and have a team, and that's why I like to be an entrepreneur, because it's like I'm either working for somebody else to live their, so they can live their dream, or I can either run my own team and so I can live mine, right? So it's somebody had given me that advice. This and there's 2 pieces, if you don't mind me saying this. I know the question's sort of a like the best, but it's in terms of how to manage money. I was going, and I'll tell a story, but I was going to a Starbucks, so it's sort of a coffee shop, and I said to a friend who's multi-millionaire, and I said to him, this is years ago, I said, he's like, what are you doing? I said, I'm going to go to this. I'm going to go grab a cup of coffee. And, and he asked me, what are you going to do? I said, I'm going to go there. I'm going to figure out how to reduce my expenses by 20%, right? Just because I haven't really done it for a while. He then said, how long are you going to spend on that task? And I said, well, I don't know, 2 hours, 3 hours. He very wisely said to me, he said, George, why not take the same 3 hours and think about how to grow your business, right? And not worry about the expense piece of it. Like, just worry about how to grow your income, and do that for 3 hours. Yeah. And that will outweigh the 20% that you'll save. Yeah. And that changed my life, right? I mean, it changed the way I see everything. And that's an important thing for people. If you need to buy a product, right? Today, by the way, before our call, we're about to buy a product. It's like a $25,000 a year contract that we're going to sign. We're the purchaser of this, right? Yep. And it's a SaaS product. Yep. And so, I don't have a $25,000 problem. I have an 8-figure. I have an 8-figure problem, right? So that's how I see things now. I don't see it as a $25,000 problem. I see it as an 8-figure problem. And that advice changed my life. So I know it's a long answer, but I think it's important for people to see the way other people value, almost the same task, right? Like how many times have you gone and said, I'm going to figure out, I'm going to cut this subscription and cut that subscription, but you could take the same time and figure out how to grow your business. Yeah, there's a lot of US sort of influencers that talk about going on offense rather than defense. And I think that's sort of summed up in your story, that if you think bigger and you think how you can grow your money, your business, you can do a lot more and add a lot more value by doing that, rather than just trying to cut your costs by 10%. Exactly. Yeah, awesome. Okay, we've talked about sort of mentors and coaches, but who's the person that's helped you most in your career? And it doesn't have to be a mentor; it could be a family member or a friend. Yeah, and this is kind of goes in lines with sort of a mastermind theory, but I have a friend of mine. He runs a 60-person, recruiting and headhunting company, right? He's based out of Atlanta, and him and I, we literally, if I have an issue, I can call him up and say, hey, how would you play the situation? Or, he's probably, in terms of like personality, he's definitely more cautious than I am, right? I'm more risk, I like risk, but, so it's good to ask him, like, how would you play the situation? And then he'll do the same thing with me. He called me up and said, George, how can I play this coronavirus piece, right? And he's helped my business and helped just the way I run things and hire people. And I'd say he's probably been the biggest influence on my business, right? Yeah. For those sort of things. So it's kind of cool to have somebody you can just call up any time of the day. You know what I mean? Yeah. And they know exactly, they know the same business. They know exactly what we do. They understand. And to be able to put those two heads together is just really, really powerful. So if you can find somebody, maybe it's a former colleague or a former boss or just another guy that has the same business as you, it's a cool symbiotic relationship.
Yeah. Awesome. Do you have any regrets?
Oh, regrets. Yes, which I'm sort of changing as we speak. Once the coronavirus thing is done, when I was at Oxford, actually, I had the opportunity to fly plane gliders.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
And I did that. So I got a sort of a pilot's license. I mean, I passed my final, sort of to get the license. And, I started to freak out during the actual flight, during and I landed and that was it. I never flew again. So that was one of my regrets that I've had that I've always sort of wished that I would change. I'm combating that regret when the world opens up again. I'm going to start taking flying lessons, but not plane gliders, but I'll start taking, sort of just, I don't know, sort of Cessna, right?
Yeah.
Local to where I live, but that's one of the regrets I have. And I'd say,
but gliding is a little bit more difficult and dangerous than flying, isn't it?
I mean, I think when you're a newbie or, like me, I think it's always, I think everything is dangerous. Right. So I don't know if it's safe at all. I mean, there's no motor, right? So you get sort of hinged up, you're above the clouds, you have to find these thermals, and you kind of and when you run out of thermals, you have to nosedive, right? This is the plane glider, which is really a sort of it's a weird feeling. You have to nosedive to catch another thermal, and then you kind of go back and, you kind of do this, and that's kind of how you fly the gliders.
What about landing? I've always wondered about gliding because I understand the sort of thermals that you're basically in back in, or often you can go higher and lower, but how do you land safely?
So I've only done it once by myself, so I'm not exactly an expert on this, right? So when I was taking lessons, it was just myself and somebody else, right? So I mean, this is a long time ago. I mean, very carefully, I guess, but this is the one thing that always had me amazed is that the sensitivity to all of the controls there. I mean, you really have to be. You have to be really on your, you have to be really on your feet in terms of it's. I don't know. Have you ever flown before? I don't know if you've flown gliders before.
No, I haven't. I always wanted to try gliding when I was younger, but I did never really got the guts to actually.
In England, it's actually. I mean, there's so much. There's a lot of open space, right? So you can do it in England quite a lot.
There's definitely areas where both flying and gliding is done sort of a little bit more in the countryside where they do it, but
exactly. But that's a regret that I wish I sort of had done. And then the other thing is I think it's taken me a long time to learn this, but I wish I started more businesses sooner. And I think when you start a business, you start one, and then you keep that, and then you do it. And then I mean, we have two businesses, and now we're going to probably start a third and fourth, right? But it's taken me a long time to learn. I should have started, them right away, right? And that's sort of the other thing I regret. So it maybe worked out better that I didn't, right? So
you learn the lessons of recession.
Yes, very, very well. I mean, I'm an expert at that, unfortunately.
I've taken notes on this. Like, I think honestly, I think coping in a recession, obviously it's very topical at the moment, but just that sort of cash reserve, being in more than one industry, systemizing your processes and giving people availability to work anywhere are the four things that I took from what you said about managing a recession. And I think it's perfect. I think that literally covers all the areas that you need to be able to manage a recession and come out the other end prospering rather than suffering.
Right. And you have to be present. I mean, this is just for anything, but you have to be present with your clients, be present with your relationships, be present with, with the prospects, that you're going after. You have to be present. And, it's still like, at the end of the day, it's still a relationship based game. It's not an email game. It's not a texting game. I'm a big fan of text, but it's, you still have to be able to have relationships. Right. So, and that to me is still the biggest, and I think that's one of the things that people can't do now, right? You can't meet people face to face, and I think that we realize the importance of that, and the inner connectivity of that value, So,
definitely. What are you most proud of?
Well, most proud of that I would say that I was able to turn I've turned mistakes, and turn them into business models, right? So statistically, none of my ideas should have worked. Statistically, I should have had a much worse life than I've had, right? So that's been the second thing, which I think is cool, and not to sound cliche, but I've got 2 kids.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I mean, I don't know if you saw this in my bio, but I run ultra marathons and marathons, right? So it's like a hobby, but I think it's cool that I'm able to teach my kids. I mean, I grew up in a household where I wasn't taught about money. I wasn't taught about taking risk. I wasn't in a great family, but I wasn't taught that. Right. And I wasn't really taught about choice, about what you can really do with your life. And I get to give that to my kids, and they get to decide later on how they want to live. Right. And they decide, you're always exchanging your time for money, right? That's pretty much what we do when we work. And sometimes you have to decide if that's worth it or not. And I've given my kids the choice to generationally change, how the McGehrins, our family, will live, not only now, but they're going to live, 100 years from now, right? Or 200 years. So I think that to me is the biggest, win, that I've had.
Awesome. So thank you, George, for your time. It's been absolutely fascinating. I think what you've talked about, not just about recruitment, about the industry, about the economy, has been really, really valuable for me personally. And I'm sure I'll get the sort of feedback from my listeners as well, that this was one of the best podcasts that I've done. So where can people find you, George?
Right. So, and by the way, it was a pleasure being on your show. You ask terrific questions, and your global sort of mindset and how, things work is just, I love that. Right. So if you ever need a favor from me or anything, please let me know. And I generally mean that. Right. So thank you for that. And so if you have people out there that are sort of, maybe they need some career advice, or they maybe even from a business standpoint, some advice, or just some branding, right? Like you need to get sort of your story together. The easiest way, and this is just, there's 2 things, right? So number one, they can just send me an email, right? And it's just, so it's George, right? George, and then at McGehrin Group. So it's McGehrin Group.com, right? That's the first piece.
Yep.
And the second thing would be, you could also just send me a text. We'll go to our group number, but it's +1 212 658 0801. So it's +1, which is an American number, 212 658 0801 for text.
Brilliant. Thank you, George. As I said, I really appreciate your time, and hopefully we'll speak again soon.
Mark, terrific to be here. Thanks again.
Thanks a lot.